Hi, everyone. Welcome to the last part of your lecture. We're talking about gender and how gender as a contemporary issue impacts children and socialization. We just finished talking about ableism and stereotypes and prejudice and understanding how we form our attitudes, and all of that is going to also play into gender. Let's think about gender a little bit. So, what are gender roles in sex typing? They're qualities that are associated or identified with each sex type. So, if you are identified as a female at birth versus a male at birth, all of those things come with certain characteristics and identities and qualities that you are supposed to conform to. There are different theories around how we kind of, as children, learn this information about what is boy, what is girl, how to identify as a female or a male. The first theory is the psychoanalytical theory from Freud. His argument would be that you would identify with the same sex parent, and you would kind of take on these characteristics because you would be in seek of love and also trying to avoid the punishment of not behaving in the uh, conceived way that you're supposed to. You kind of unconsciously take on these characteristics based on getting reinforcement for doing so. It's part of the process. The next one is a social cognitive theory from Bandura. And the idea would be that your behavior around how you engage in these certain qualities around gender is reinforced in your socialization. So if you act like a girl, that's kind of automatically reinforced if you're a girl. If you act like a boy, it's automatically reinforced. And it can be something that's pretty unconscious. We're not intending to do it, but it's part of how we think about things. So it comes out in our actions and our language. Some examples might be if you say, "Oh, you're so pretty, just like your mommy." That's might something to a girl you might need to say, or you might say, and that reinforces the concept that, okay, as a girl, the expectation for me is that I'm supposed to be pretty. I'm supposed to take care of my looks. This is how people identify my value. Conversely, you might hear something for boys around like, "You are so big and tough. Wow, great job not crying." Then that associates, okay, for a boy, it's very reinforcing and I not to cry and to be big and tough. And so my value lies in my ability to kind of withhold my emotions and look strong and tough. And so all of those pieces get reinforced in the social context. Okay. And then let's take a look at the cognitive development process. So we have this idea that really cognitively we are constantly thinking about these things and trying to digest information. And so we take in our observations and our interactions and we cognitively process that information and we group it into categories. Okay, this belongs to the girl category, this belongs to the boy category. This Barbie doll goes in the girl category, this truck goes in the boy category. Speaking in a rough tone, that's a boy thing to do. Speaking in a quiet tone, that's a girl thing to do. So it's this idea of we're just trying to process information as quickly as possible, so we categorize it to make it make more sense. The last theory is around gender schema, and that argues that we have different lenses we see things through. So if we are thinking through our gender schema lens, then we're going to filter information by gender. So, for example, if I'm as a girl, if I saw a pair of overalls and I did not have my gender schema lens on, I might think, "Oh, do I like these overalls? Okay, I'm going to wear them." But if I did have my gender schema lens on, I would think, "Okay, do girls wear overalls? Okay, no, sometimes they do, but not really. I'm not going to wear them." So this idea that, again, we're sorting information based on what we know about genders into two different groups. Talking about our developmental progression of understanding of how we come to kind of understand gender in our development. At 12 months, we already understand gender stereotype toys. We understand that certain toys are meant for boys and certain toys are meant for girls. And all of this is reinforced by what we see and how we interact with our families. We can see how what we're given for presence would impact that. What we see on TV, if you think about commercials, who's playing with what toys in commercials, all of that is impactful, and we get a very clear understanding of it at 12 months. At 2 years old, we start getting some vocabulary around how to describe gender. So we have the understanding of boy, girl, sir, ma'am, woman. All of those things come into place because we're already learning there are two categories in our society. At 3 years, we start having an identity of our own gender. So we're starting to think, okay, how do I identify? And that does not always match up with what we were given when we were born. At 3 to 5 years, we broaden our categories from toys to include clothing, occupations, and colors. And this is when you get this idea of pink is a girl color, boy is a blue color. boys can be firefighters and girls can't. All of those pieces children learn very early. So understanding the representation is so necessary if you're working with children in classrooms, especially. At 8 to 9 years old, we start getting more flexibility in our thinking, and this is a representation of our cognitive process. We don't have to be so rigid in our thinking. It doesn't have to go in one category or the other. We can have some more fluidity and flexibility between the two. But for the most part, we still understand the social constructs and the social expectations around gender. We're just more flexible in our ability to view it. All right, let's think about the influences on gender. Obviously, family is a huge influence. We're given certain things, we're talked to certain ways, we're encouraged to participate in certain events, certain sports, certain activities. All of that comes from our family. Our peers are a big influence as well. If we think back to the in group, we are more likely to be friends with people who are the gender we identify with, and that's going to influence how we view our gender. School is also a big impact. We think about curriculum again, how each gender is represented in curriculum, as well as how it's represented in the room. What kind of interactions happen with the teachers? Are the teachers more reinforcing with boys versus girls or girls versus boys? Are they more quick to punish certain genders? All of that impacts how we view our gender. The community also has norms for gender and how we're expected to interact and engage when we go out and about. It's more acceptable. I'm sure everybody has heard the terminology boys will be boys. That is a community and kind of societal construct, this idea that boys can get away with a lot because it's the expectation that they're going to be a little bit more impulsive and rowdy, right? That is a social construct that forms how we think about our gender and about the other genders. Media obviously has a large influence on that when we think about commercials, social media, TV. All of these pieces definitely play into how we view ourselves. Interactive media would be more social media. It could also be video games. So if you think about how men or boys versus girls are portrayed in video games, that has an influence on how we think about gender. A good example might be superheroes in video games and who's a superhero, who's not, who needs rescuing, who doesn't need rescuing. When we think about even Disney movies and how women are traditionally portrayed, girls are portrayed in those movies as needing rescuing. Even when you think about Mulan, if you think about it, she is gone to war under the guise of being a boy. She wins the war, but her kind of biggest accomplishment when she comes back home is the fact that one of the generals has followed her back and wants to date her. So again, kind of, even though the movie starts to kind of change the script on what we think about genders, it ends with this idea of your value still lies with this piece of finding a man, or at least it represents it that way. Okay, so just thinking about all of those pieces, lots of influences on gender. I want to talk to you a little bit more about gender and kind of the different components that go into it. Gender expression is often shaped really early on in life, very young, around that age of 3, right? We're getting the idea of what gender we identify with, and that's when the expression comes out as well. We have an individual understanding and experience of being your gender. If your gender matches what you were given at birth, how you identify matches what you were given at birth, that's called cisgender. They're the same. We also can see that this is not something that happens worldwide. This idea of having two genders, boy and girl, is not something that is a worldwide way of looking at gender. That is called dichotomous, the view of two genders, masculine and feminine. That is something that we have here in this country, but culturally it varies around the world. We see a lot of different cultures having more fluidity and a third gender present. And just to give you an idea, I want to share a map with you around all of the places in the world. So anywhere there is a dot, there is more fluidity and flexibility in how they think about gender. There's a third gender present. So that's pretty remarkable. All right, so really just getting into the heart of the fact that gender really is a social construct, and depending on your culture is going to depend on how you think about it. I also want to mention to you, transgenders are just people who are assigned a certain gender at birth and they do not identify with that gender. We can see this beginning really early on with what's something that's called gender dysphoria, and that's when we start expressing something different than what we were assigned. So if we see girls, in the old age, we would call that a tomboy acting more like a boy. That's this idea of like, I am no longer feeling like I identify with this gender and I'm starting to express myself differently. And again, that happens very early on in preschool age years. Let's talk about a little bit about bias and discrimination. I broke it down into 2 categories because really there's 2 things happening here when we think about gender and sexual orientation. There's gender bias and there's sexual orientation bias. Gender bias is perpetuated and created by stereotypes and what we expect to happen. And it breaks down into two different types of sexism. The first one is hostile sexism, the idea that women are less than men, that there's a negative association, that women are not as smart or capable. And then there's benevolent sexism, which is the idea that women require men to be successful and be supported, and they should be protected and cared for. More this idea of they have a certain role to play, and men are there to make sure that they are taken care of. When we flip the script a little bit and talk about sexual orientation, we see that homosexuals and bisexuals are treated differently in society. And that's because we live in a heteronormative society. We view that as the norm. If you're not heterosexual, then it's kind of not the norm in our society, and therefore we don't think about your needs as much in the society. And because of that, we've created stereotypes, and there's a lot of misinformation and homophobia. So again, just kind of the fact that thinking about how society and how we think about it from an ecological context perpetuates some of these places, some of these thinking, some of these processes, and how that might impact children who are going through some of these pieces or identify in certain ways. So just being mindful of that as you work through your working with children and families, and being mindful of your own beliefs. I just want to talk to you a little bit about examples with gender bias. These are some examples that are perpetuated to this day. This example is around parenting. So we see in the first top left-hand corner, a dad dropping their kid off at school versus a mom dropping their kid off at school. The expectation is the mom does it, but the dad is involved. We see the dad walking with a stroller and the mom working with the stroller, but one of them, they're both on their phone. Dad is present, but mom is inattentive and not being a very good mom. On the bottom left-hand corner, we see a dad pushing a kid on the swing and a mom pushing a kid on the swing. And the difference is dad's being a great dad and mom is she's doing her job. We can see how mom brought home fast food and dad brought fast food home in the bottom right-hand corner, and how that changes right there. Dad is fun, mom is lazy. So the idea that there's certain expectations for women to hold up to that men do not have, and if they do engage in some of these behaviors, they're given extra credit for. Additional areas that we're impacted on, obviously we have occupational bias. When you do your watching work, you'll see how that's impacted in children and how we think of certain occupations being female or male. There's different parental expectations like we just talked about. There's appearance standards, the idea that women are kind of always supposed to be put together. There are also standards around protection, right? When we think about different types of sexism, women should be more covered up or more conservative. Those are also pieces around gender stereotypes and understanding. We still have a wage gap in this country. Leadership is still heavily weighted towards males. We see microaggressions happening at this point in time. There's definitely double standards, and men are more likely to be promoted than women are. So lots of signs of gender bias within our country. Okay. With that, I enjoyed talking with you. If you have questions about any of this, please reach out. We talked about ability. We talked about gender. We talked about prejudice and bias. And with all of this information, I just encourage you to be open and reflective and think about where you stand, because all of those things are definitely going to impact your ability to work effectively with families. All right. With that, I'll see you in the checkout.